this is a particularly interesting panel for me, obviously, because as press, it's interesting to hear from the other side of how people think that it's good to contact press and how it's good to contact audiences and stuff. So if you want to start with Natalie, obviously you already have introduced yourself, but if you want to give a really quick reminder of who you are.
So I've been in the games industry about 25 years. I started life as a graphic designer, and I was the editor of a Nintendo magazine for 5 years as well, so I've kind of been a journalist too. And since 2000 I've been in PR, so I headed up PR marketing team at Blitz Game Studios for 12 years, and the last 2 years I've had my own indie PR agency.
Hi guys, I'm Robbie. I'm the PR and marketing manager at Rebellion, kind of big old guard studio for the UK. We've made stuff like Sniper Elite and AVP. I've been in marketing 7 years or so, specialising in the digital side of things, and 2 or 3 years ago I saw a tweet from Rebellion saying they're looking for the first marketing person, and I thought actually that's a little bit more interesting than books publishing, so that looks like fun, and we've now got a team. I've also been joined by Sinan, who's our PR coordinator, is in the audience as well, and we're going to be doing one-to-ones later if you guys want to sign up and say hi.
I feel a bit weird talking again, but I'm James. I didn't say I've been in the games industry for about 18 years now. So to my shame, I started at 3DO. If anyone remembers the Panasonic and Gold Star consoles when they were transitioning over to PC, and I think I may even have gotten one of PC format's lowest ever review scores at 7% for our decathlon game, which I'm totally proud of. Thank you very much.
Now, a lot of people who are making games for the first time or haven't been doing it for very long, they might hear words like marketing, PR, and comm strategy and just kind of panic because they don't really know what it entails, especially if they're working on their own. If you had to define it really, really briefly, how do you define marketing versus PR? Like, what are the differences? Do you want to start with Robbie?
Yeah, I've got an interesting angle on this. I mean, the simple way, obviously, is that you would argue that marketing is coverage that you pay for, PR is free coverage. Of course, especially in games, that isn't true. You'll hear from the guys here that it's about time, actually, especially for an indie developer. I'm lucky I have a team, and we're given budget at Rebellion. So that's the artificial kind of 1990s divide. When I was in publishing, I didn't even know the PR person at Pearson, which is a multinational publisher, and that's ridiculous. Games is actually leading the way, I think, a lot in the way that it actually makes PR, community management, and marketing almost all one thing, so they're kind of seamless in many ways.
Yeah, what he said. I think I broadly agree. I think we don't just in our agency that I co-own. We don't just work in app marketing. We work actual B2B tech clients, mobile clients, totally a million miles away from this. And I think what we found is the reason we're a PR and marketing agency is because the lines, it's an amorphous entity now. Like the lines are blurred, especially in B2B. With content marketing, creating surveys and guides, and then you throw social media into the mix. A lot of people still work with us and say, hey, I haven't got a review, you're not doing your job. Well, hopefully not, but because they just see in terms of PR, whereas a lot of the other things when it comes to app marketing are not to do with the media, they're to do with a lot of the other things I just told you there, where we may spend 90% of our time and effort giving advice, but the PR aspect is very traditional. Did I get a review? Did I get a preview? Did I get covered in the media?
Natalie, do you ever wake up one day and go, today I'm doing marketing, and then the next day, today I'm doing PR? Where's the difference like you?
No, I mean, I think that, as the guys have said, I think that the definitions are increasingly irrelevant, actually. And, PR stands for public relations, but it's only really in the last few years that you've been dealing direct with the public rather than the press. For that purpose, and as I said earlier, it's kind of, I think it's really democratising now, and actually you can get straight to the people that are going to be playing your game or going to be potentially loving your game. And I think those definitions are actually unhelpful sometimes, because I think a lot of indies you get a bit freaked out by the prospect of having to promote themselves, kind of go, I don't know whether I should be doing marketing or PR. It's like, you should just be telling people about the game. Let's not worry about the definitions.
Okay, so James, you talked a lot about how people should have a lot of money set aside for marketing. I think as a marketing person, how do you, what's the top of your list for why marketing is important?
I mean, I don't think they should have a lot of money set aside, is the important thing. I think they should have some money set aside. I think from a mobile perspective, it's quite brutal. There's a brutal reality at the moment, and obviously games like Monument Valley and others are kind of bucking the trend, and actually Apple now pretty much always has a banner for paid games. But it's a problem I can't answer, or a challenge, not a problem, a challenge it's very hard for me to answer, because when you've got freemium, by virtue of the fact you've got freemium game, you're then possibly going to have to start spending tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds a month on UA marketing and analytics and other things, which is a very, very frightening world for a lot of people. So I don't have totally have an answer in that regard, but I would say if you're going to spend, not have any UA budget, then spend it on doing your PR or getting someone like Natalie or any of us to help.
Yeah, so I was going to say, Natalie, obviously because you're freelance and you're doing this on your own, your whole, when you're able to make a living.
Well, on my own.
Oh yeah, you've got people working with you now. But your ability to make a living relies on your ability to tell people that they need you. So why do people need you?
Well, I guess if I can't PR myself, it would be a fairly major fail. Can I be cheeky and deflect it back to something that James was saying? I think with mobile, as you say, it's very, very tough, and I think it's why a lot of people are actually trying to establish themselves on different platforms. And at the risk of shamelessly picking my client again, Terratech, all the main guys involved in that came from really strong mobile backgrounds, that they've consciously tried to establish the brand on PC, because it's not easy, but it's easier. And they've been quite explicit about the fact that actually, that will come to mobile at some point. But it makes more sense to look at the markets and see where you can make some headway without chucking hundreds of thousands of pounds in UA.
Yeah. Okay. How does that fit in with what you do, Robbie? The idea of needing marketing.
I think an important thing today that gamers especially like to do is they help market your game for you, or obviously in the PR, the old traditional way of saying, or let the journalists, if they're interested in your game, do the coverage for you as well. So that's naturally important. A good example, actually, I was chatting to Keith Andrew about it at lunch, is a couple of guys at Rebellion who actually asked permission to make a game in their own time. So they made this really cool little shooter app on the App Store. It should never have been picked up by anyone in terms of it was a lot of fun, but it was made by two guys. They're up against a million other apps. They worked really hard on the Touch Arcade forums and spreading news that way. You traditionally call that community management, I guess. Then that got picked up by Touch Arcade. They featured it. Then it ended up being a Huffington Post like app of the week or something. And then Apple read that, and then they gave it a small feature, and they got a load of downloads. Now, they're not rolling in cash or anything. They haven't quit their jobs. So, but that's an example of where something small goes a long way, because even if you don't have a massive budget, you can do something smart that will allow someone else to do the marketing for you.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, Robbie, actually about creative kind of campaigns that you can do. Maybe if you don't have a huge budget and you can't afford to just buy a load of ads and stuff, what are different kinds of things you can do?
So I just did a report actually for our CEO about the marketing we done on Zombie Army Trilogy, which, as you can guess, is about zombies and has armies in it, which came out on Steam and also on the consoles. And one of the interesting things that came out of the social media side of things, that creatively, you can put up screenshots and things like that on, you can put it across Facebook and Twitter. But the images that did best were pictures of developers. We did one where it was 4 of us dressed up as the characters in this stupid pose, and it got the most shares, the most retweets, and things like that. So that was a lesson in don't just go with a hard push, and yeah, screenshots are nice, but look at actually what your audience is interested in, and then do more of that. It's all learning. I mean, I like to think of myself and come on these panels as an expert on social media, but really when I came to Rebellion, I'd just done a bit of Twitter here and there, and within a year of just running things myself before got more people in the team, just learned so much. So it's about getting out there and experimenting, really.
I think the kind of data side, so to touch on what you were talking about before, there's tons of analytics and data and stuff that you can draw through, but actually just simply looking at the page views on your Facebook page, the kind of default stuff that you get on Facebook without having to dig down into buckets and buckets of BI.
Yeah,
it's still really useful.
I want to stress, it's not like an analytics, you be a mathematician, it's basic stuff.
Not at all. No, yeah, I mean, just have a look at what works, what gets shares, what gets liked.
What are some different kind of things that you've done, Natalie, like creative stuff that other games haven't done, that makes you different?
I don't know really. I mean, we've kind of experimented with all sorts of things. I'd agree that a lot of that kind of behind the scenes stuff works really well. That's always been really strong with Terratech in particular. I mentioned earlier with Sky Saga, we're looking at Instagram and Snapchat at the moment as well, and just trying to be a little bit different about stuff and trying to make sure that one of the main things I always hate is when people have kind of 3 or 4 different social channels, but they push out exactly the same thing on all those channels.
Yeah,
and people that hook up their Twitter straight to their Facebook, it's like chances are if I'm really into you or your brand, I'm going to be following your multiple channels.
Yes,
I don't want to see the same thing lots of times. But if you're going to, you want different stuff, but it wants to be telling the same story. Yeah. So like with Sky Saga recently, we used Instagram for concept art and behind the scenes stuff, but it was along the same theme as the same things we were talking about in the blog, which was then presented in a different way on Facebook. So it was the same part of the story, but we were using different assets to tell that story in different channels.
Oh no, okay, go.
I think just going back to what Natalie was saying about democratisation of marketing and PR, you know, a lot of it, like I said earlier, is I think developers, no one knows a game like your game like you do. You know, nobody knows it better. No one's got more passion. And as much as I might be a gamer and love a game and think very highly of it, I've also only got a certain amount of time. So I think the grassroots approach, you know, Reddit can be quite scary, for example, for a lot of people, and quite a brutal place to be. But I think the developers themselves will do much better going through places like Reddit and social channels, and actually and on mobile, you know, Touch Arcade forums are very big, for example, Eurogamer forums, and engaging on a genuine grassroots level, people, without being too salesy. If you're authentic and you just want to engage in conversation, share things with people, you can get a lot back from it and help build interest that way that a social media expert or agency is not going to have the time to do on your behalf. So you've got to kind of do something, and also just keep trying, experimenting. There's no rules.
I was going to say, because it seemed like in your presentation a lot of your stuff was very kind of analytical, and how does the idea of doing more different and creative campaigning fit into that?
I think it's a very good question, because I was bemoaning with Will outside before the lack of ability to be creative on mobile, especially until recently. I think that it's been a very, very established approach for a lot of people. You got your media, get it reviewed. I think now we're just trying to think more. You know, as I said, we did those songs as like a bit of throwaway fun, but they're just examples of where we're just trying anything for not much investment, just to try and raise it up and do something different. But it's quite hard, because the old days of desk side briefings and jollies and stuff are not there when it comes to mobile. You're often dealing with somebody who could be very dismissive sitting in the Midwest of America, and you're one of a few hundred people mailing them, so it can be quite difficult, and you can't mail them merchandise and stuff like that.
I think the other thing as well is that you didn't necessarily feel the pressure to come up with all the creative ideas yourself. That's the beauty of having a community, right? You actually see what they're doing, see what gets them excited, and you know, I've seen that lots of times with stuff I worked on and other games, that the ones that do really well are the ones that really pay attention to what gets the community excited, and then work with that, kind of showcase what people have already done, and then take that idea and take it in a different direction.
Yeah, okay, so that seems to be very much what the developers themselves could do, but obviously your job relies on you being the only person who can provide that service, Natalie. So what are the skills that a PR person needs that a developer might not have, or skills that a developer should work on if they don't have the money to hire a PR person?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, again, similar to some of the stuff I was saying earlier, I think that kind of that creative thinking, like we're saying, it's kind of looking at things from a different perspective. I think from my standpoint, because I spent time as a journalist as well, I've always found that really useful to be able to think as a journalist, and like the guy was saying on the panel earlier, you know, what's going to be of interest to your readers, and I think that's been a big help for me, definitely.
Okay, what do you think, Robbie? What kind of skills are necessary?
I think a key one is copywriting. Personally, it's something I do tests for that when we hire people. It's a really important part of the business. But the cool thing is, working with developers, it's almost intimidating for me, because a lot of them are just so much cleverer than I am, and a lot of them are also very creative. So, you know, I tend to get some really good ideas off the dev team, so being close to the game is really important. But if you're talking about doing stuff yourself, yeah, practice your copywriting. So that, was it Natalie saying, write a press release even if you're not going to send it out? I think it's a great idea.
Get other people to read your stuff, because even if you think you have quite a good standard of spelling and grammar, you won't spot your own mistake.
Yeah, and then just some basic numeracy stuff, which again probably won't be an issue for most developers anyway. So other than that, I'd just be open to ideas and doing a lot of research. Things move quickly, especially on mobile. I mean, there's things that James was talking about that a year ago I was going, oh, this is all the cutting edge kind of things, and then suddenly it's stuff that has gone. Facebook's algorithm is the biggest pain in my backside at the moment, so that's why content at the moment, like I've suddenly realised, posting links on Facebook, if you want to share a great YouTube video, nothing, because they're like, oh, it's going to Google, we don't want that. So you've got to post your video, embed it in Facebook instead. If you want to share news or links, go to Twitter, use something that's more suitable for that now. So just keeping on top of that, following like SEO Moz and HubSpot and people like that. It takes time, unfortunately, but that's the resources you've got to put in.
Okay, so speaking of social media, do you all think it's a good idea to have multiple social media accounts, not just have Twitter, but have Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that?
I think it depends what you're trying to achieve.
Right.
It's a horses for courses thing. So like I said earlier, there's no point having a Facebook page if you're about to release like a match 3 or whatever. You're not going to have a massive community building up around that wants to have discussions about the game and look at exclusive concept art. But for other games, that's something that's going to get people excited and they'll want to follow a Facebook presence for it. So you've got to look at the kind of game that you're doing, look at how other people that have done similar games have done, see where they've been successful, what channels seem to work for them. That's the great thing with kind of the top level sort of data, if you like, with Facebook. You don't need to be an admin to go behind the scenes and see it. You can go to their page and see how many likes and shares and stuff they've had. It's all right there. Yeah. So you can see what works for other people in your space and then plan your times.
Okay, so talking about getting examples of what other people have done, what are some bad examples that you've seen around marketing? What are some things that have gone wrong? Oh, got any examples? Or mistakes that you've made? Yeah, you can mention your own. What's the hardest part of doing the job that you do? When does it all go wrong? What happens when you get negative publicity? What do you pretend?
Oh no, that's interesting. So, okay. So I worked on a small indie game last year that kind of divided critics, and I think the important thing is if you get negative feedback as a developer, the worst thing you can do is leap on Twitter and start bitching about the journalist that gave you a bad review. It's a very small industry, and that's going to bite you later. Again, there isn't a kind of one-size-fits-all solution to that, but I think being kind of upfront and facing criticism is an art. It's a difficult thing to do, but you don't want to become a hermit and ignore it all, but you don't want to get really bitchy about it either. I think it's always worth sort of trying to take criticism in a constructive way, even if it's perhaps not framed that way. And I think I've seen quite a few clients and other indies turn negative situations around by being really sensible and being really open to stuff and kind of going, okay, well that's really interesting feedback, thanks for that, how do you think we could do it better in the future, or what do you think we could change to improve that as we go forwards. And I think you can try to rise above it and try not to take it personally. Sometimes that's really hard, and sadly not all journalists, and I'm not talking about anybody in this room obviously, they're not all as professional about sharing their opinions in that way. So there were a couple of people in particular who are now probably off my preferred supplier list of journalists who dealt with this particular game, and instead of just posting their review or just talking about it in the channels that they work on, they were then just randomly bitching about it and taking the piss out of it on Twitter to anybody else that would listen. That, to my mind, crossed the professionalism boundary,
right.
And that's affected my relationship with them going forwards.
Okay.
But I think as a developer, you need to not rise to that if you possibly can, because it never ends well if you start getting into a fight with people about stuff.
Okay, Robbie, have you got an example?
Yeah, I had a bit of a harsh lesson roughly this time last year when Sniper Elite 3 came out, where my lack of traditional games PR kind of kicked me in the backside. We had an issue with Steam keys being revoked because they were stolen from a supplier. I'm not going to bore you with all of this stuff to do with retail boxes and everything. But we thought, well, we had a reasonable explanation. We were giving people free DLC to apologise, even though it wasn't our fault, it was the distributors and all this kind of thing. We thought, this is great, people will come to us moaning their game's not working anymore, they'll get a refund, they'll get the game again, they'll get free DLC, everyone will be happy. This was not the case. And the main reason for this was because a very unscrupulous keys reseller decided to do some, what I'd actually call incredibly good PR content marketing. I'm going to say good and I'd say unethical, but it drove masses of traffic. They wrote an article about us saying we were fixing the price of the game and were part of this wider malaise on Steam and it's a monopoly and all this kind of thing. They got huge traffic. They made loads of claims about us that I had quoted to me 6 months down the line by a PC Gamer journalist because he'd remembered it. It was like, you revoked 20,000 keys. That figure never came out. Someone made it up in one of those blog posts. And because we weren't, we knew there was going to be some bad news, and instead of being clear and open about it early, we let someone fill that vacuum with a loud voice with no real backing. And unfortunately, that became the official line for a lot of people. So we had a lot of people coming to Facebook and Twitter saying, how can you let this happen? This article about you. And then we guys, hey, don't believe them. Honestly, that's a load of rubbish. But it's too late by that point. And I think that was the main lesson I learned last year was if you've got bad news, but you can be honest about it, you know, not cheating anyone, then make sure you got your facts straight, and actually maybe it's best to have that out first before someone else does.
Yeah, I think getting ahead of that kind of stuff is always really crucial. And one thing I always try and encourage people to do is to try and be really cynical actually in advance. I always kind of say that when I was a blitzer, I always used to say I tried to be the most cynical person in the room, because actually you then get the most robust communication strategy, because you're thinking about all the worst things. So like, you know, again with Terra Tech, we've had different stages where the price has changed, or content has changed, and we know that that's the way the game wants to go ultimately, but we also know that some of the hardcore are going to be annoyed because we've changed elements of it. And so we kind of sit down and kind of go, okay, the most pissed off people here, what are they likely to ask us? Right, well, let's all get that in an FAQ and let's explain it really clearly. And the second the thing goes live, the FAQ's there, and that helps to diffuse people and turn people around.
Have you got an example?
Well, Keith may say otherwise, but I think from mobile, you should see it less and less. I don't want to make out mobile some hinterland, creative hinterland, but it's so young that you just don't see this in abundance, you know, as much. I think a slight flip of that actually that taught me differently is I worked on a game called Fluid Football, which was actually a very, very lovely football game where you had to plot where the ball should go to players, and it was actually backed by Andy Gray and Richard Keys. And at the time, well, at the time they were a couple of sports football pundits who were caught making extremely sexist comments. So I got working on that game not long after they had become PR toxic slime, and the developer we were working with, we had an internal debate whether to play up their involvement, and they actually, you know, I was invited around to someone's front room in Fulham to watch Andy and Richard doing a mock commentary on the game and film it and stuff, and I thought it'd be terrible, and actually, to my shock and horror and surprise, no one mentioned the fact that they were untouchables in PR terms, and people were perfectly happy for them to be associated with the title. So I think that's an example where someone's got the backing of famous people where I personally would have not mentioned it or done anything about it because it was just horrible and sexist and terrible, but for some reason it worked.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay, so here's an interesting topic. I was going to talk about your relationship to press and stuff, but interactions with YouTubers and streamers and everything. I know Natalie's got a lot of experience with this. Have the rest of you got experience with interacting with? Okay, so do you have lists of YouTubers who are appropriate? Do you just send them out to everybody? Do you have blacklists of ones you're not keen to engage with? Natalie?
I wouldn't say blacklist necessarily, but I think it's like you were all saying earlier about targeting and who's going to be most interested. So my YouTuber database, I tend to have a little notes field on each of them and the kind of things that they've historically been really interested in. Some of them have been explicit about the sort of things they do and don't like to receive, which is also worth knowing. So it's just a case of keeping that up to date, but it's like any of these things. We were talking about this the other day about contact databases. It's practically impossible. You could spend 24 hours a day trying to keep a contact database up to date, but if you're, like you say, if you're taking the time to read the news, to follow Twitter, to see what's going on, and just be aware of the kind of things that people are into, then you're much more likely to get through to the right person at the right time.
What about you, Robbie?
Yeah, it's obviously a massively important part of, especially what you call core games coming out for the consoles and PC. We try to approach people early because now actually even the smaller channels, guys, define small in terms of subscribers, but say if they're under 100,000, even those guys now post schedules up. I'm going to be playing these games for the next 2 months. So if it's someone who plays your kind of game, say you make shoot 'em ups, and there's someone who's really into his old school shoot 'em ups, make sure he knows about that. He knows that game early. Also, just don't trust everyone who emails you the Gmail address saying I'm this YouTuber, because I'm afraid. I reckon for Zombie Army Trilogy and Sniper Elite 3, I reckon about a quarter of the requests I had were fake. And what they do is they change one letter in the email, so it looks, if you just do a quick cursory glance at their channel information, you think, oh, it's the right guy. So unfortunately, that's the reality we live in now. So getting a verification process, but making them part of that, being friendly, being professional, is it's the same as as Keith was saying earlier, just be human about it, really. Some of them are a bit ruder and a bit kind of uppity. Some of them are really love the fact that they'll even get to chat to you. So it's really just case by case basis.
Okay. So as a kind of final question, talking about YouTube and streamers and stuff, would you say that that's the kind of cutting edge, or is there another newer way to contact people that people should be considering, James?
I think once again, just with a mobile hat on, I increasingly feel that mobile and Twitch are the place to be for reaching out and getting hold of people. Just because I watch my own kids as well and what they do and how much they, I don't know if you're familiar with Stampy Longnose, who does the Minecraft videos, but this guy, my daughter's 9, she obsessively watches his channel. He puts out a video every day. He plays for half an hour. He's got on average 250,000 to 1 million views a day. So these are the mega people who are covering games. But I think also there are people on mobile who are engaging in smart ways with the big games guys. PewDiePie obviously is possibly I think he's the biggest YouTuber in the world, let alone just for games. And Seriously, who are a Finnish company, bought out a very polished game called Best Fiends, and they actually engaged with him to do a challenge based around giving money to malaria charity. So you can look that up, and Pocket Gamer covered it, and it's covered a few other places. But I think the Best Fiends Seriously example with PewDiePie is a very nice example of how, from my perspective, a mobile game have managed to engage one of the biggest people on YouTube.
Okay, awesome. Robbie?
Things are always moving. I'm still trying to get my head around a lot of things, like Twitch especially is something that our games don't necessarily suit because they tend to be slower paced for shooters, or they're not Hearthstone. I don't know, I think the content side of things, your song example is really interesting one, because if you come up with some really interesting content marketing and that goes viral, then that can do the job for you without having it on one channel. It could just be Twitter. Yeah, I'm afraid I don't really have an answer to what I think is coming up next, because if I did, I'd probably be very rich.
Fair enough. Natalie, what do you think people should be concentrating on that's new and modern?
Yeah, I mentioned very briefly earlier, but Meerkat and Periscope, they've literally been around, 2 months, something, I guess. But there's some really interesting stuff going on there already, and I think there's a few devs that have already started to engage with that, a few press that have as well. And I think I haven't had a huge play with it myself yet, but that strikes me as kind of a really good way to dip your toe into the streaming side of things before you tackle Twitch, as you say, especially if you're not Hearthstone. So yeah, I would check those kind of things out at the moment and look at all of those kind of emerging platforms.
Alright, awesome. Well, thanks you guys. I think we'll go to questions if we've got any. Anyone? Alex?
So with regards to, so you were saying on YouTube they got schedules and stuff, and you might want to get them sort of lined up in advance. What's your opinion on Twitch? Because I've been told, like, the Devolver marketing guy was like, yeah, like 2 weeks before is the earliest you want to do it if you're like really confident in your game. Otherwise, just do it, like just throw out stuff on the day. But would you advise to like earlier than that, or like, does that sound about right?
Devolver are awesome, so listen to them.
Yeah.
I think that sounds right to me. I mean, we're still, as I said, we're still learning about Twitch, and I found it a lot harder in general to get hold of Twitch people compared to YouTube. And again, YouTubers, you'll see it with stuff like PlayStation Access, they almost now fit that more traditional PR thing where you give them code of a certain level in advance, and they'll play one level and that video will be up there for search on YouTube. Twitch, yeah, I think the chat you're chatting to has probably got a good point in that Twitch streamers want to go right deep into the game and playing it for hours on end and hours on end, and they can't do that before launch. So yeah, I think maybe that makes sense to go later potentially with Twitch.
I've been told the main thing is that like if you launch like too early on Twitch, then you might like prematurely like blow your metaphorical load. And, like,
so is that panel that Mike Biffle was on where he said not to send code to YouTubers because then they wouldn't cover the game again? If you send it too early, they cover it once and then they wouldn't cover it again at launch. Yeah.
My brother says don't like just wait until like the last day and then just.
What do you guys agree with that?
I think it depends on the game as well. The other thing to know about Twitch is that people that are streaming regularly, they are more driven by how they can interact with their viewers and interact with their community because it's live than YouTubers are. So if you've got the kind of game that encourages that, or there's easy ways you can make it easy for them by giving them codes to give away to their viewers and to their subscribers as they're watching. That's the kind of thing that's sometimes easier to hook Twitchers in with than with YouTubers because there's obviously a more passive experience with their viewer base.
Cool. Any other questions? on, and I guess. Oh no,
Well,
Anna.
just a quick point because nobody's got a question. is that we did the Chartboost University thing last year actually, and as part of that we had to write a press release, and then they had someone from VentureBeat, Dan Chu, I think his name was, to give us feedback on that. And when I wrote mine, I thought, right, I'm going to do this in the I'm going to be the Daily Mail when I write it, and I just wrote it in a way that I felt was very crass. And he said that's brilliant because, you know, and I guess it's just the point about you might having to ditch what you might think to get those sound bites. So because our game's about antiques, and because two of us used to work on Tomb Raider, so I put in the header, which makes me cringe. I said Tomb Raider vets did game about archaeology and antiques. That was the subject matter. And then in the first line was, is at the Antiques Roadshow your guilty pleasure? Ours too. So we made a game about the antiques, and he said that's like great because it's going to grab attention. Although personally I felt that's quite, you know, cringeworthy. But I guess your opinion on whether you just have to kind of put those sound bites in there and just be a bit razzle dazzle about stuff you're sending out.
Yeah, I think the argument about the death of the press release is an obvious one that everyone kind of skirts around at the moment. But I definitely think when I'm trying to do a press release, you know, when you happen upon the Tomb Raider vets, that would be number one hook, obviously, to really try. You've got to try and find your hook for making someone interested, and often it is the pedigree of the people involved in games. It's really the pedigree of the people who worked on the project as a major hook for the games media. So I thought that's a really good thing to do. You liked it?
Yeah, no, that's great. Like, I mean, let's be honest, everyone knows that you're just trying to get us to write about your game, like, so be as crass as you want, really. we know what's happening here, we know what the transaction is. You're not hiding it from anyone.
What if you saw a subject line like, hey, write about my game?
I would probably not read.
A bit too crass.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Can I
You
just
can
say
make a
one?
closing point, go for it.
Well, just a final thing actually. That once again I can only talk from a mobile perspective, but there was a panel at the Mobile Games Forum in late January, early February this year of all the sort of main guys from mobile games media people sat on. And the thing that came out of it for me that was quite strange for the dynamics of the mobile media is, from a lot of the American guys, is that they don't necessarily any longer perceive themselves as the drivers of interest or content. Is that it's become quite a passive thing, whereas they're sitting back and waiting and looking on Reddit and YouTube and Twitter and all these social channels and trying to pick up on a buzz. So actually you may find with some media, I can't speak for any in particular, that they rely much more on a groundswell of buzz before you approach them than necessarily going to them and then immediately going, oh, I like the look of that. Like, it's kind of a strange dynamic.
For some games, definitely. For ones that are more kind of niche, targeting a specific journalist can still be a good first
Absolutely.
step.
I think it might just be a mobile thing. It's like you said, it's with particular journalists.
Yeah,
They don't see themselves the gatekeepers of driving interest anymore.
No, there's a lot of sites that seem to just write about stuff that's already happening.
Yeah.
And games that have already picked up in popularity. Cool.
Well, I think that's true with YouTubers as well, like I said earlier. You know, the bigger guys will wait and see what bubbles up. So you need to work on that groundswell.
Yeah. So, any final questions? No? Awesome. Thank you very much, you guys.